If your CEO has only red numbers, he's not going to be there, right? So the KPIs need to be financially, and I agree with what Dave said. Most CEOs that I know or worked with or worked for, they are very heavily bringing somebody in with good financial assistance. So that because manufacturing, the shop floor talks different financials than the corporation, right? So there's very few people they can translate.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our number one priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. Operations is all about KPIs. You need a ton of KPIs to measure efficiencies, to lead your team, to motivate them to make sure they are moving at the optimum speed. Manufacturing or non-manufacturing operations can't operate without KPIs. Don't have good data, most likely misleading KPIs, don't have data at all. How would you have KPIs at all? Have a ton of data but no insights? How would your KPIs be reliable? So which are the KPIs CEOs need at their fingertips to ensure their success? In today's episode, we invited a panel of cross-functional experts for a live interview on LinkedIn who brings significant expertise to discuss the top KPIs for COOs. We discussed the best KPIs that COOs should be measuring. Finally, we discussed how the KPIs might differ for a COO depending upon the reporting and org structure. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's show. And if you're joining for the first time, this is part of our digital transformation series, for which we meet every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. We pick one topic related to digital transformation. And for this year, we are going to be talking a lot about KPIs. For today, we have KPIs for COOs, and we have some of the real COOs in the room, and we are going to have some of the consultants who are consulting with CEOs. So we are going to have a lot of fun with that. Before we do that, we are going to start with everybody's intros. I am going to start with my intro. If you don't know me, Sam Gupta, your host and principal at Elevate IQ. Elevate IQ is the independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm. On that note, I am going to move to Chris for his intro.
Hi, Sam. Thanks. Chris Gherardini, president and owner of Turnkey Technologies. We've been a 29-year-old organization focused on the Microsoft Dynamics ERP platform. So business intelligence and KPIs, and everybody's like, what does KPI stand for? But we'll talk about that a bit. Glad to be here.
That was the question I was going to ask, Chris.
Keep people interested.
Keep people interested. Yeah.
So we are going to keep people interested for the whole year, I guess, because we are talking about KPIs. Okay, Dave, can I move to you next for your intro?
Absolutely, Sam. I'm excited for this. I feel like this is going to be a really rowdy conversation, as it should be. Everyone, if you don't know me, my name is Dave Griffith. I run a company called Kaplan Solutions. We focus mostly on manufacturing and industrial companies on the plant floor and helping organizations run more profitably and better down that path.
Yeah, and when Mike is here, I'm trying to be a little gentle, to be honest, with respect to conversation, but you are trying to provoke me, Dave. So this is going to be a rowdy conversation. Mike, can I ask you to introduce yourself next?
Thanks for having me on again. I thought last time was so good that you wouldn't re-invite me, but I guess it wasn't good enough. So thanks for having me here. My name is Mike Schlagenhofer, and I'm a manufacturing consultant for a property and casualty insurance carrier, and I'm a consultant to about 7,500 manufacturing, covering everything from food to ready mix. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Guten Abend.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Mike. Paul, can I ask you to introduce yourself next?
Sure. President of For a Better Business. We our stock and trade is developing immediate, enthusiastic buy-in to change across the whole company, and we'll do that in one day, and then use the participation and contribution developed to achieve large-scale change with meaningful improvements in a matter of weeks.
Wow.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Paul. Andy, can I ask you to introduce yourself next?
I would love to. And first off, Paul, I think what you just described is an oxymoron. No?
Paul froze, I guess.
Being able to do change management.
No, I was waiting for oxymoron to say, what's the...
Anyways, it doesn't matter. I was just trying to make you laugh.
Keep going on that. Keep going on that. I'm happy to talk about it.
No, that's okay. I never heard of that ever happening before in my life, but that's okay.
Oh, well, I should introduce you to some of my clients.
I'm sure that would be an interesting call. I've been involved in ERP software for manufacturers for over 4 decades. I've worked all over North America. I'm in Vancouver, Canada. I'm on the other side of Canada than Sam. And I lived in the U.S. for 11 years. I used to, I do more than work with manufacturers. I teach manufacturers how to uncover the truth about ERP systems before they buy. And in fact, I've got a webinar coming up in 2 more weeks, Sam. I might invite you this time, but it's going to be what used to be called Apex, but now it's called ASCM.
Yeah.
So they asked me to do a little pitch, so I'm going to do a story for them. Okay. So thank you for inviting me.
Of course. Thank you so much for being here, Andy. And so far, I knew that you could speak only 2 languages, but today you spoke 3rd, so maybe you can speak a lot more.
And by 2 languages, he means I speak Canadian and American.
Exactly.
Because when I speak in Canadian,
and
I put an H at the end of the word, at the end of the sentences.
Exactly. Thank you so much for being here, Andy.
Thank you
all right,
so
guys.
much for inviting me.
Of course. And if you are in the audience and joining for the first time, make sure you guys post your questions and comments, because typically I don't have a lot of questions, so I rely on your questions. If you run out of time, we'll make sure that you receive your answers. On that note, I am going to start with the first question with Chris. Chris, so we are talking about COOs. In my mind, when you think of the CEOs, and I don't know how people are going to feel about this statement before I want to put a little qualifier there, because, in my mind, when I look at the job of a COO, probably it is one of the toughest job in general, okay? Because you are dealing with human operations, you are dealing with operational capacity. Okay, my sales guys are going to say, okay, my job is the toughest, I get it. But here, there are a lot of different variables that you have to deal with. So a job of a COO could be extremely challenging as well. And if they don't have the KPIs that they can really use to run their operations, it becomes very, very, very challenging in general. So Chris, over to you. So when you think of these KPIs for the COOs, what are we looking at here?
At a macro level, what's the job? Productivity and performance. If we really just boil it down to and say, okay, and that means a lot of stuff, right? It could be velocity of a sales pipeline from an operational perspective. It could be, where are my bottlenecks in the shop floor? What's broken? Where's my capacity constraint? Where do I not have a raw material I need to run production for the next 2 months? And you go, where's the biggest pain point as defined by what? Rate of revenue loss per hour, per minute? There's a lot of different ways to rationalize it, but in productivity and performance, right? How do everything's moving. Got the right velocities everywhere. Perfect system. But again, and I think as you could articulate, there's different KPIs by industry that this guy's got to be looking at. And you're right. Where's the one that's red? We talked today about color coding. Green is good. That's cash. Okay, great. But red is not good. And you go back to alerts, and I made the comment about, keep people interested. Okay, so what does a KPI do? Key performance indicator. Okay, what's it indicating? It's indicating that a decision needs to be made quickly, and a lot of times, or an intervention, an escalation, right? So normal KPIs, great. We're looking at them. Sales results, but again, there's action. There's the ones that require immediate action. Then there's the ones in your rearview mirror. I think that's another major classification of KPIs. Or future looking. There's not even the real time one. There's the one that's looking out 30, 60, 96 months, a year, supply chain. So now as you go by industry and you go back to which one's looking out a year, which one's right now, which one's the trailing indicator. So as we classify these time horizons we're watching, okay, Do I have more time on the one that's future looking? Well, yeah, I got a little more buy time. The one that's real time right now, again, those might get a precedence. The trailing one, you're right. I can go look at the sales report tomorrow, next week. That's not. But so here we go, prioritization. But that's it. Without getting into specific ones, I think by production, again, you may be looking at picks per hour per person. That's a distribution KPI that may be very important, because what would it indicate? Maybe you set some benchmarks. You say, hey, we're right where we should be, or hey, we're 20% below, and that's how that thing gets actionable. You got the metrics, you got the people. It tells you, hey, something happened over here. Johnny's 40% below. Okay, somebody goes check on Johnny. He's laying in the aisle. I don't know, but again, that's a distribution KPI. But the production one is, I have a client that rationalized all their production into graphical silos, and they can very visually see in which work center they got a problem. Right? If they're all floating pretty good, that means, hey, it's moving well. But whoops, what's happening? And so immediately this draws them in. They're a medical device manufacturer, but there's a huge KPI that, again, they can drill down, click, 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 click. They go to see the MOs and what's the operation and what's going on here. And this is it stopped? Is it equipment? They're really depending on, but it's one big cone that says this is good, this is bad. And so there's a couple examples. Again, a lot of other people that want to talk to. So
okay, amazing. So I am going to provide some more layers and commentary there. And typically, what I am going to bring to the table is, when you look at number one, size, always. I mean, that's always going to be my favorite sort of layer that I want to bring into any KPIs or any role. Size is always very important, because a COO of $1 billion organization has different responsibilities than a $5 million organization. Then it also depends upon what has been their background and which industry they are from. Each industry is probably going to have different responsibilities of a CEO. Now, when we look at how the reporting structure works, and maybe you guys can talk about that as well. Okay, so in terms of the reporting structure, if the COO is going to be from supply chain background, okay, they have very different ways of looking things. I don't know if each industry is going to have a supply chain reporting to the CEO, depending upon how the organization is set up, right? So we might have supply chain, we might have engineering, we might have manufacturing, we might have production. And if you go to industries such as retail, then you might have merchandising, planning. That could be part of sometimes operations, sometimes not. So it could be all over the place. So Chris, over to you in terms of all of these layers. The KPIs are also going to change based on the role.
But I also think, and to your point, there's a lot of other constituents that would consume similar KPIs to a COO. And frankly, again, I don't live in $1 billion enterprise space and have it. And again, the COO's over $1 billion company. Can he really manage? Can he really, again, how effective and how much work does that person do? I always call out the usefulness, but you get down into the smaller mid-sized orgs, the COO, the operations guy, he's integral and has to have an agility for decision making. It's not, but again, I'm looking at a KPI, click, oh wow, it's red. What do I do? Okay, they have to have some real skills to interact with the business. And the $1 billion that you set the precedence for, what's he doing other than calling somebody and asking a division leader, hey, there's something wrong in your plant in work center 5. So I think those KPIs are going to be consumed more locally. The guy up here at $1 billion company, I mean, what's he doing? He's looking, oh, everything's great. I mean, I'm being a little facetious, but I think that you're setting it at this level. It's a whole different world that he lives in, as opposed to, I'm running a plant and I'm an operations guy. Are you a COO? Well, again, in a manufacturing setting, in $1 billion, he's so far away from production. Again, this isn't $1 billion company's not going to have one production plant, which means in the enterprise model, again, KPIs are going to be consumed. So your layers, as you think about, okay, who's really making decisions based on those? Now, do they roll up where the guy can see what's going wrong or right, but somebody else is dealing with it? Again, I'm not sure. Like I said, the $1 billion layer kind of challenges the perspective a little bit, because I think operations, if you think about operations general, we talk to the audience, everybody in the audience is working for $1 billion company. Okay, but I think that people are trying to understand operation KPIs need to get that they're consumed by people who are going to go make a decision, not from 4 layers up, and it's going to take 2 weeks for someone to get this, or we're going to have a board meeting and talk about the red indicator. But these are real-time decisions in like the real-time KPI category I'd use. But I think the COO may be looking, those guys may be looking trailing. Anyway, how did we do last month?
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much, Chris, for that. So, Dave, I'm actually coming over to you. And when you are going to be at that $1 billion level, in my mind, I think KPIs are going to be far more important in general, even though Chris might think that they are simply calling the other guys and figuring out, what the problem is. But you are actually owning a P&L, or you're out. And if you have to own the P&L, you have to have numbers on your fingers. If you don't, then you are going to be in real trouble. So KPIs, the bigger you are, the more important the KPIs are going to be in general. Then you call when you have the problem in the overarching KPIs, and then you probably have to trace it down. Okay, which guy to call, because you are probably going to have 50 to call. So that's why KPIs are really important. Dave, over to you in terms of CEOs, your experience in dealing with the kind of organizations, and what kind of KPIs have you seen in your experience? Over to you, Dave.
Absolutely, Sam. I would say I'd like to commend Chris. I think this is the first time that we've knocked someone off on the floor lying in the first 10 minutes of Sam's show. So thank you for that. Our hearts are all worried about Johnny out on the floor. Having said that, and I think both Chris and Sam make really good points, right? I don't think the COO of Amazon, who, if I had a little bit more forethought, would have Googled to see who that was, is going to get down to the granulars of, hey, do I have one person who's 40% below what they're looking at? I think kind of the most granular they're probably going to get at this level, because Sam continues to demand that we only pick like 4 or 5 KPIs to give all these people. And I made the joke before, we could easily fill a dashboard of 5 with important KPIs for large organizations like that. But when I think of billion dollars, I'm imagining the COO, because they are worried about that profit and loss, are going to have some sort of cash KPI in there, be it a cash convergence or some sort of kind of play off of the cash convergence, so that they know where they are, that they're going. Because again, I think to Chris's point, we have to have good leading and lagging KPIs when we're looking at that. I think we need to go look at employee or facility performance, right? And at that level, it's probably throughput compared to estimated throughput. Maybe throughput compared to estimated throughput, and overlay some costing on there and what future sales look like. But I think that the facility performance compared to what we need it to be, and then kind of beyond that, I think that we've got a couple of those supply chain pieces that were, one, on the logistics side. Am I going to get the product that I need to be able to go package into boxes or go make widgets? And 2, what does that look like? Am I going to have a line down for 3 months because I have, in 3 months, am I going to miss a core component to be able to run the widget that I'm trying to make? And if I am going to make that, because I know 3 to 6 months out, what can I do as a COO in order to drive my company and my facility towards success? So I would say, kind of on the high level of the billion-dollar company, I think that those are kind of big KPIs that are important. And then I think as you get smaller and smaller, you get more granular. You might get to, hey, what does one shift look versus the other shifts if I'm only in charge of one facility? What does one shift look like against, the other shift, to see where we are and compare those against target. Maybe if I'm the COO and we're more regionally and we've got half a dozen facilities, maybe I'm comparing facilities against facilities as closely as we possibly can, because again, I own P&L, and if I own P&L, if one facility is pulling ahead, is 3% better, I want to go take that 3% that we've learned and try to drive those learnings to other facilities.
Okay, amazing insight there. Thank you so much, Dave, for those. And you make some very interesting point. And obviously, I want to ask everybody their opinion in terms of what they think. But overall, when you talk about the cash, and I don't know how many COOs are going to have the accounting background. They're going to have very deep operations background, supply chain background. They are not going to have as deep accounting background. Typically, they pair up with a controller who is going to be handling this more from the cost perspective, from finance perspective. So typically, in my experience, at least that's what I have seen, that COOs are not going to be responsible for cash. Okay, their problem is probably not going to be cash. Their problem is going to be delivery, and after that, finance takes over, and they are going to be worried about cash. Typically, that's how the organizations are structured in my experience. So, Dave, I don't know if you're going to have any sort of follow-up comments there, agreement, disagreement.
Well, I guess I would say I don't know a ton of COOs who have that finance background, right? Like that is probably the CFO, right? And it should be the CFO. We need more competent people who are happy to go live their lives in the general ledger and beyond. What I will say to that is cash is generally an important metric to most people who have operational control or operational visibility, right? Like I need to know, can I go hire 10 more employees because I have, this large order coming in? Or can I say, hey, we can go buy a little bit more of this product and leave it on the warehouse because my supplier has a bunch of extra and I can go get a really good deal. So knowing kind of yes or no on the operational side is very important. Then on the flip side, right? So we see lots of large organizations laying many thousands of people off now. I'm sure that was done at the cash level and probably at the highest levels in order to say, hey, we need to cut overhead. Right, wrong, or indifferent, I imagine that was done on some sort of like cash convergence or some sort of, cash convergence plus projection for the next 12 months.
Okay, amazing insights there. Thank you so much, Dave, for those. So, Mike, I'm coming over to you. So, obviously, you have run slightly more SMB organizations. I don't know what has been your philosophy in terms of what CEO should be doing and what kind of. I'm pretty sure you have probably assigned some KPIs. When you are going to be hiring a COO, you are going to give them, okay, these are going to be your 5 KPIs, and that's how you are going to be measured on. And if you're not able to deliver on those, then probably you are out. I don't know. So what has been your experience overall with CEOs and what kind of KPIs are going to be most important? Mike, over to you.
There were a couple of good things been already mentioned here. That the COO has to actually take the plans and convert all the sales order, all the demand into actually making money. You talked about profit and loss, right? If your CEO has only red numbers, he's not going to be there, right? So the KPIs need to be financially, and I agree with what Dave said. Most CEOs that I know or worked with or worked for, they are very heavily bringing somebody in with good financial assistance. So that, because manufacturing, the shop floor talks different financials than the corporation, right? So there's very few people they can translate this. So the CEO that I know, they got their own financial people. They then talk with the overall the chief financial side, more of the business. And I think Chris mentioned something. I think that's they have to be a responsive person or a responsive role. Again, if the company is big, you're not responding to a work center in the factory. You're responding to a regional. But I think they need to very stay on top of their KPIs daily, if not hourly, depending on how it is. Because if you see that trend happen and have multiple facilities in one facility, is my other facility. We talked supply chain, right? I'm running out of raw materials. Well, I make the same widgets in 8 plants. Now you need to be very responsive, and this data that you roll up needs to be very quickly. I think a lot of data that a CEO looks at, it can be a weekly data. A COO needs to have that daily, if not hourly, on depending if it's 3 shifts, whatever they're running 7 days a week. I think that data needs to come quickly, needs to be updated. It needs to be talked last week about clean data, needs to be very, very fast to him so he can respond or make the decision or put the people out there that respond to it. I don't think he's going to go out there and bring the raw material to the machine, but he needs to see this machine is falling. Here's what sales say and we need to deliver. Here's customer satisfaction, right? He's the guy in between that needs to make this work. So for me, he needs to speak multiple languages. He needs to have the KPIs at his fingertips. I think those are the guys that got the tablet with them or the laptop and flip it open. They go out somewhere, they flip it open, they take that and say, everything is running. Everything, Chris calls it always red, green, on yellow. And that's, I think those guys are literally live by the traffic light. If any of those lights change, they need to get their people out there, or depending on the size of the company, need to do it themselves. So that's where I see from a manufacturing role the COO very responsive, very involved. And again, as higher, bigger the company, you don't need to go down to the nuts and bolts anymore. You work more at the full assembly level. But I think they have to have the hand on the pulse, and the KPIs that they use need to show that pulse. We just had, what did he say? Johnny fall over, right? Pulse goes up, right? We need to respond to this. Why did Johnny fall over? We don't want to have Sam and everybody else falling over. So before I end, to honor our third of the panel being Canadian, I just say, hey,
Okay, amazing insight there. Thank you so much, Mike, for that. So I don't know, Amisi, if you want to touch this question, and this is a very interesting question in general. Okay, so I'm actually gonna read, and I'm not getting the name of the person who posted. If you have the name, I'll give you a shout out. So please send over if you're still there. But the question is, and it's very interesting because I don't know if this is really going to be connected with the KPIs, because at the COO level, as much as you want technology, but I don't know if you're really going to be worried about that. So here they are saying actually the elite tier enterprise COO is more concerned with how accurate their digital twin is reporting and how well the automation is performing. Digital twin is great. I love it, but I don't know how much it is used in practice. And if you can really rely on a KPI based on your digital twin, I would be shocked if any company is tracking using that. But Mike, do you have any comment over this by any chance?
I think digital twin is still in the infancy. There's some larger, especially in the automotive company, they have their plants digitalized. And I think you can use it right now. Also, that's where I'm familiar with it. I built my plan. I have a product line change. I put a new vehicle out of. I can run that on my digital twin and say, here's the scenarios. What does it do to my KPIs? So when I turn the real factory on, I know what I'm gonna expect. Well, I need more resources in automation, or I need more maintenance technicians to take care of my automation. I think yes, I think it will change the role of the COO as you get in companies that have a digital twin, because I think you can play that mind a lot with product modeling, with time to market. You can run through that and play the scenarios and say, oh, supply chain breakdown, supply chain slate, and put that in, and suddenly your KPIs changing. Now, I wouldn't do that, but I think it can give you, like in design engineering, you test the product to failure, and then so I think currently the COOs, they have that resource, should use that to play the what if happens, and then they are not going to be surprised. They can put prevention in there and they can react to it because we played the scenario.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Mike, for those insights. And Paul, I'm coming over to you, but before that, Andy, I'm actually gonna give you an opportunity. I know that you probably have to drop early. I don't know how soon that is going to be. So, do you want to talk about the top KPIs that you have seen in your experience, Andy? You are on mute, by the way.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, I got to leave in about 5 minutes, but I'm going to get a crown. Isn't that sweet? Well, everyone on this panel has been naming off all different kinds of KPIs, and I'll tell you what, I love Chris's comment about keep people informed. That's beautiful. But whenever I'm describing what a KPI is, because you got people that are advanced, understand these things, other people that are very, very neophyte or very entry level. And I'd explain to people that you have KPIs every day of the week. As a matter of fact, it's called a dashboard. As a matter of fact, it's called your car dashboard, because when you're going too fast, when you're running out of gas, when the engine's getting too hot, blah, 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 blah. It's all very common sense. And, I'll tell you one more thing, because everyone's been talking about red versus green. And, obviously those are the most common colors in KPIs. But 10% of the male population is colorblind, including myself.
Me.
Paul, well. There you go. So when you go red, green, it's a bit of a problem. But it doesn't have to be color coded. There's all different ways for KPIs to be displayed. But there's, and I'm not sure, I think it was Chris that said there's probably 1,000 or 10,000 or 1,000,000 potential KPIs depending upon the industry, type of company, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No question about it. But the late, great Dr. Ellie Goldratt said, all that matters is profit, and it's the goal, and it's throughput. And if you can, because yes, you can measure everything till your cows come home, but if you're not making money, you're going to go out of business. So I'm going to say it's throughput.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Andy, for those insights. And by the way, Chris is only interested in keeping people interested and not informed. Okay. That's the business he's in. Okay?
Interested. Okay.
Yeah, Andy, you made that much better. Yours is better. Keep people informed. I think interested, informed is so much.
It's all the same. We got two different versions. Beautiful.
But I love it, guys. Keep people informed and keep people interested. I really do love it.
Anyways, guys, thanks a lot. Have a great day. Have a great
show. Thank you so much, Andy, for joining. So, Paul, I'm coming over to you. And I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, and I think you have actually held a COO role. And I am always interested in validating the insights of the consultant, how much they really understand the COO. So, I don't know, when you held the role, Were the KPIs given to you? Did you have to create your own KPIs? How did that journey go? So, in terms of the top KPIs in your experience, Paul, over to you.
In mid-market companies, having all of this data at your fingertips and all of the reds and greens, and you got all this maybe at a high enough level that exists, but in my experience, in the majority of companies in that mid-market, that doesn't exist. Doesn't exist because they don't have a clear understanding of what their real actual process is. We've got issues on the supply chain. I mean, at one company we did I did a challenge survey of their fast ship area and found stocks in there that were expired 10 years ago. I mean, there's a KPI.
Yeah, we can definitely hear you. Maybe you want to try switching off your video. Maybe that's gonna help. That could be a possibility. Try that. Yeah, go, Paul. If you can speak, maybe that's probably gonna.
Yeah. Okay. I'm
yeah.
just gonna. I'm trying to stop the camera, and it's not doing that either.
It's
So,
much better.
I mean,
It's much
really,
better, Paul. Go.
there are three areas here that fundamentally the COO needs to be responsible for. One of those is throughput, which we've talked. A second of those is all of the customer facing product related issues. What are we doing on time in full? Are we doing the consolidations of it? What is our performance to the customer? What's our performance internally? Let's say throughput. And then how are we in fact working with the outside world to get product in? Now, keeping those three basic things, which then drive profitability. Okay, it's a lagging indicator. Nice if it was leading, but usually it's a lagging indicator. Look at those three, and then for your particular organization, drill down into what are the critical things there. So maybe on the supply chain, you need to know what 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 is out there that's preventing you today from delivering product. And I talked with a CEO who said, "Don't talk to, don't have anybody from XXX Electric. I'll leave the name out. Call me because I will beat them around the head and shoulders because I've got three complete lines sitting on my dock ready to ship." Well, there's there's things you need to dive into on that, from that perspective, and it needs to be driven by what's the real situation in your company. What are the drivers in your company? Discover those, and if you try to keep 1,000 metrics or 100 metrics, you have a heck of a time figuring out what's going on. So I used to be in the shipbuilding business, and the operators were saying, we want this dashboard that tells us everything that's happening on the ship everywhere. And when we went to see how it was being used, the most effective tool they found was a box of toothpicks. Okay? And you know where that goes, right? So they took the alarm cancel and they put a toothpick there so that they weren't getting all of these alarms because it didn't mean anything. It was so much information. It didn't help them do what they needed to do. So I'm in favor of a very limited set of drivers. Understand what's really there. Drill down to those if you kind of if as you need to, but keep those key functions in mind. Customer facing, what are we actually doing? Throughput, what is in fact limiting? I mean, the statements of deal with your bottleneck. Well, in a lot of companies, plants, mid-market plants, they don't know what their bottleneck is. They have no idea. I mean, I had one. The bottleneck was the quality guy who would only accept things at the center of the distribution. Well, he was limiting plant capacity. There's your throughput issue. So drilling down from those core things, customer facing, throughput and the resources you need to get that done. I think if you start there and start simple, then you can get to the things that you really need and understand what those drivers really are. And if you think A is a driver, I mean, I had one company said, "Well, our driver is the production instructions really aren't good." Well, whole different set of drivers turned out to be, and actually, the operators who they considered to be the issue were in fact the saving grace because they knew how to make the product, even regardless of whether or not the instructions had been updated. So I think it's very specific to the situation you're working with. Uh, keep keep the main drivers, customer facing, throughput, getting the materials and resources you need, and then drilling down as appropriate for your business. Or I mean, and that includes, for instance, product development. I mean, understand what's happening in that whole pipeline because that's your future sales profile.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you so much, Paul, for that. So I'm going to have just one follow-up question there. So you mentioned some COOs were not able to sort of have the sense in the bottleneck. So from the KPI perspective, I don't know what KPIs were they tracking, and what would you do, let's say, if you were the CEO of that company, which KPIs would you add so that they have the sense of bottlenecks? Paul, over to you.
Well, the first place I'd start is let's in fact, lots of discussion about digital twin. Let's in fact create a visual twin, so process maps on steroids, if you will, of what really happens according to the people who actually do it. Now you have a very rich field to look at and say, okay, we see what's happening. There are things that we in fact, as you do that, you see all of the things that are issues and that fixing them will move the needle. And with the visual twin, you have the tools to actually do that. And then that drives, now you can look at KPIs. So they had in one case, they did not have any kind of first run quality. None. Zero. Okay. I mean, you can talk about digital twin, but if you're not if you're not looking at basically how do things work, if you start with KPIs, you may get a very nasty surprise when your KPI looks wonderful and the performance is terrible. And I guess on that note, there's another aspect of creating KPIs, which is a lot of times people look at what I call one-sided KPIs. Maximize this. Okay, people will do great. Maximize this. But really, yes, maximize, but subject to some other measure so that you're not sacrificing all the rest of your performance to achieve this one KPI. And so it ends up being a very hands-on, deep dive. What's really happening in the company and where are the levers that we have to make things work.
Okay, amazing insights there. Thank you so much, Paul, for those. So, Chris, I'm coming over to you, and we are going to be talking about the KPIs that are not going to be as meaningful or probably are going to be wonderful, as Paul was saying, but they don't really add much of a value. So, terrible KPIs, that's number one. Any sort of stories that you might have or comments over comments? Chris, over to you.
Yeah, and again, I think my perspective is more with the smaller orgs. That's why from a COO at $1 billion, I don't have that direct relevance. But I think that as we've heard, and everybody's done a great job of throwing this in there, we got macro and micro KPIs. And again, at the $1 billion level, he's looking at facility throughput. He's not really looking at. He'd have to click on something to say, well, and whether he does or not. But I think you've articulated that position. There's a macro set of KPIs, and it's gonna change as we come downstream to where there's somebody that's directly responsible for initiating action based on a KPI. Right? Two different worlds as you frame this big guy, but the little one. But I think getting into some of the specifics, I still think I like actionable KPIs. I like the ones that you can click and you can actually fire something off. And I think that level of interaction isn't at his level. So again, is he just looking at throughput and looking at facility variance and why is this facility 3% better? And again, I can't really speak to that. So other specifics, I actually dug into some logistics to see some key. If you think about average delivery times, you think about transportation costs. Interesting is you look at the types of KPIs that you would see in like an average delivery time. So imagine the pivot or the dimension is location. So delivery times by location. If you're a transportation company, maybe you're looking at Europe, U.S., Central America, Southern. That's a great high level click. Hey, why are we so different in this country, this country? Other things is you look at just cost, transportation cost. If you're in logistics and you say, okay, what are your dimensions within transportation costs? So you start breaking down actual transportation, warehousing, inventory, admin. So even the granularity of, and that's macro, but this is a COO guy, in a logistics management space. But and again, where do you go beyond that? Things that drive revenue. And I heard you're right, Dave. Cash. Okay, again, what level is this COO? And again, depending on if he's really intimate with operations and has that agility, like you get it, Michael. And you got to be, I'm not way up here. I've never lived in that world. Sounds great. But anyway, I don't know if you've got anything specific, Sam, on other conjecture on those.
I think the only thing if you want to touch on any meaningless KPIs that you have seen in your experience that you
meaningless?
would not probably, just KPIs you are doing for no real reason.
Really don't move the needle. Yeah. I haven't. No, I have not. I have not been exposed to some of those because typically the ones that are important don't exist and get built custom, and so I haven't had anybody really fabricate it. Now, are there things that come out of the box in the systems that people are looking at or focused on? Anybody mature in the role knows what kind of data they need, and I think that back to the color comment. Most of these KPIs will have a value, a numerical, or some kind of a value in addition to a color on them. So if that is an issue, but bad KPIs. Unfortunately, we don't focus on those, so I'm lucky. I guess I'm lucky. I'd hate to sell somebody one and then say, "Is it work?" And they're like, "No, it doesn't do anything." You paid me a lot of money for it. It's like silly. Anyway, so no, we've never. Anyway, but it is interesting as you look at what comes out of the box, and I think that's still the lesson. Is we've got some clients that are trying to rationalize. Well, what are they measuring? Well, how do you measure it today? And then they, we're doing a new ERP project. Like, well, does it do that? Well, what we find is there's a lot of the real industry specific ones that Microsoft doesn't build them out of the box. Why? Because everybody measures stuff a little differently. And so you'll see standard ones, finance, receivables, payables, and you talk about those types of KPIs from an organizational. But as you get into supply chain or inventory or even production or even service management or everybody's got different nuances. And I do believe there's some commonality to things that people would measure. Again, cost, variance, again, what lights you up where you need to take timely action versus, okay, this is a bigger undertaking to bring this KPI back into alignment. But, the integral nature of is it, COO guy, forecast, actual performance. Okay, is he driving forecast? Yeah, I think there's got to be some wherewithal as you get into some of these areas, unless he's got somebody else doing his demand planning. But again, how big is this org and does he do anything? That's my facetiousism about that. But if you're really an operations guy and you're really running operations, demand planning, forecasting, and performance against budgets, and okay, what are the adjustments to process to bring things trending back into goal, right? Because there's no adjustment. Hey, right, we're right back. One day I changed it, it's fixed. It doesn't work like that. So sometimes there may be multiple organizational changes to drive a KPI back into a range of expectation. So there's a real participation in, how constantly are you measuring the let's call it, if there's 3 metrics being moved or 3 attributes being moved to drive a KPI down. Now you're sub-measuring each of these 3 influences. Say, well, which one's really moving the KPI? So think about the analytics behind that, because really the impact of that operation coming into the green zone, right? It's $1 billion in revenue or $1 billion in profit. So there's where profit comes in, where the KPI may not be dollar signs, but we know that once it drops into this range based on where it's out of the range. But there's a great example of developing a KPI and then also coming up with change management that impacts the KPI and then measuring how effective the progress of that is on that KPI. But again, if this is that one that really makes profit, right? The end result of this one, it drives profit. Anyway, a couple examples.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for those insights, Chris. So Dave, coming over to you, any meaningless KPIs, I guess, from the perspective of a COO, any stories or comments over comments? Dave, over to you.
Absolutely. I've got a couple of meaningless KPIs, so I will offer myself up. But first, I do want to make the comment towards Paul's comment earlier of mostly those small middle market facilities, also facilities that I spend most of my time working with. Absolutely, and even all the way up to the Fortune whatever, don't have the most beautiful dashboards that exist, right? I think that to some not small extent, it is kind of, if we had all of the most perfect information in the world, what could that information look like? I know lots of facilities, small, medium, and large, that know how they did by someone and going counting the cases or the pallets at the end of the day, and then maybe we actually go and review what that looks like at 7 or 9 o'clock in the morning, the following morning, and then about 30% of the time someone has to go back and correct those because we've got mistakes in this Excel spreadsheet. So that is certainly much more realistic than the alternative of we know the most perfect things as it's going in real time. That could certainly be what we all hope for, but unless you're a very large or maybe very new company, that in my experience is not something that is going to come on day one as a COO of any size. I guess I kind of have two sets of KPIs that I don't think COOs should look at. And one generally looks into utilization, right? So we talked about throughput. In my less than humble opinion, the focus should be throughput. How much do we throughput at the facility as opposed to a labor utilization or an equipment utilization, right? I would say maybe if you're on that smaller to medium size organization, you could be looking at those utilization rates. Maybe if you're a $1 billion+ COO, you're looking at kind of utilization overall as a whole, as opposed to utilization with context. What does the utilization look like versus throughput, for instance? That is a much better indicator. And then beyond that, especially on the procurement or supply chain side, because I've seen this happen a number of times, if you're just looking at procurement costs, I've worked with a number of smaller shops, especially like CNC shops and things like that. Procurement decides we're going to go save 5%, 10%, 30 cents a bit. We're going to go buy the slightly less expensive bit, and suddenly our scrap goes up 3x. So procurement cost, without looking at cost versus quality and perhaps some sort of ROI in there, also a bad and or dangerous metric or KPI to look at.
Okay, amazing insights there. Thank you so much, Dave, for those. So, Mike, I'm coming over to you. Any meaningless KPIs, any stories or comments over comments?
I don't really can think of a CEO that I worked with or worked for that had a meaningless KPI. But I think some of the things I think it was mentioned by Chris and by Dave is, we can measure everything, and you can kill yourself looking at all your dashboards, right? On all this information. I think you need to have, even when you have good KPIs, you have to have a couple focus ones, and you need to understand how they interact. I think Chris says, something goes out over here, you're adjusting three things over here, right? Which one did it and how did it do? I think you need to understand that how those factors that you maybe not measuring in your KPI impacting that. And if you don't understand that, I think then the KPI doesn't do anything for you, right? It says you're in, you're out, you close or whatever. You need to understand what factors go into this. The data alone won't tell you, here's what's you need to push button A, or I think Paul talked about a toothpick, put the toothpick in to stop the numbers from coming in because the numbers don't really mean anything, right? Fix the problem. Why is the number generated? And I think a lot of times COOs focus on the dashboard and they might ask the wrong question. I go back to my lean background is go out on the floor, do the Gamba walk, find out what it is. Now again, in a $1 billion company, the CEO sits in Florida on the plant in Idaho has a problem. Yeah, he's not going to go out, but he needs to have somebody there that he can say, go out there, go find out what it is. And then what Chris said is, I really like that is, how does that impact that? We turned 6 knobs. Which knob was it, or was it a combination of knob 1 and knob 2, right? And then we need to understand it, and then the question should go back, should we measure that knob now? Because we know the knob is the fix or the trigger, is the good or the bad. And then does that matter, or is that a once in a blue moon? Because, I like this when Chris says people want all those dashboards. We come in, we create them for it, right? And then nobody looks at them. I think Paul said that too, that ship had 1 million dashboards and they were worthless. So I think you need to constantly ask and question you, do my dashboards give me the information, give me the insight that I need? And if not, change them. Then, because depending on the business, it might have been relevant 6 months ago, it might have been relevant a year ago. Is it still relevant? Now, there will be, like we talked about, throughput on cost in, cost out. Yeah, we know they will be relevant, but we measure so much that we sometimes focus on something that really doesn't have that impact. So I would warn CEOs to look at your dashboards, look at your KPIs. Are they the right ones? How do they work? How do they act, and how do they interact? I'm making a change over here. Suddenly my throughput goes up. Now my supply chain is breaking down because I fixed the bottleneck over here. Well, I'm putting this stuff through. Sales is happier than when the trucker's pulling it off the back. Problem is over here stuff isn't coming in, right? So I don't know if that gives you a little bit of an idea.
No, it does.
And
Thank you so much, Mike, for those insights. Paul, coming over to you, any meaningless KPIs?
Yeah, I've got a couple that all revolve around the statement. There's no extent to which a person will not go to avoid the real labor of thinking. So this was a company that they were a fruit cooperative. So they gather fruit from the field and package it and ship it. And they were having an issue with variance. So they would get variance between what they thought they did that day and the inventory. Well, if they had 1,000 boxes, they considered that a variance of 1,000. If they had 5,000, it was a variance of 5,000. If it was one, it was a variance of one. So they had all of this data tracking the number of boxes in a variance rather than tracking the instances of variance. So they have this ton of meaningless data that they couldn't act on at all. But when you considered instance of variance, now they had clarity. They can go into their system, track that particular. I mean, if you're looking at Pareto's and you got 5,000 and 3,000 and 8,000 and 10,000, and that's the actual data underneath, 3 variances and 2 variances or 1 variance. There's a whole different level of being able to track that. And once we got that basic definition sorted out, they were able to go and look in the system logs. I mean, they'd gone to the point of creating a parallel accounting system for for inventory because they couldn't figure this out because another one. So company having issues, they're shipping 50% on time. They didn't have an effective inventory system. This is the one that had the 50% of the product in the fast ship area 10 years out of date. Somebody in the production meeting to proposed sorting this out. On the way in the morning, everybody would walk through the plant and try to see where material was so that when they reviewed the late orders, they could say, oh, I saw this material over here and over there and over there. And everybody on this call has been there, seen that kind of thing, I'm sure. Someone came up with the brilliant idea to create an accounting category, which we should track, called lost. And if we couldn't find the material, it would be put in lost. And eventually, when we did find it, because, I mean, the plant had fixed dimensions, eventually this would show up, then we could back it out of lost and put it in the regular inventory system. I thought that was a particularly egregious example of misuse of data and key indicators to manage what you're doing. Okay, by the way, we got them from 50% on time to 96% on time while taking 22% out of their inventory. So there are solutions, but they all came around by visual twin, understand how things really work, drill down, see where real issues are, fix those at that level. And then, by the way, you get buy-in from the people who are doing the work because all the information's coming from them.
Yeah, amazing insights there, Paul. And probably that is a very simple parallel accounting system. The one I have seen was slightly more complex side, okay? And they were tracking lost in the warehouse, lost in the order, lost while walking. So many
different categories. Thank you so much, Paul. Chris,
They
closing
sound
advice.
ridiculous and no one would believe it, but in fact, that's the reality of what we see every day.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Paul. Chris, closing advice, please. 2 minutes.
As you rationalize the KPIs, it makes sense for your organization, right? We've heard it a bunch of times. They impact customer service, they impact profitability, and then they could impact employee morale. So again, are those the three most important things in your life? They should be. So measure accordingly and decide what actions happen when the indicator crosses the warning zone. That's it. Just be ready. That's all I can say. Check your data. Make sure it's accurate.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chris, for that. Dave, closing advice, please.
Absolutely. I would say, as a COO of any size organization, you have to use the data that you have in the best ways that you possibly can. So pick an appropriate number of leading and lagging indicators and do your best to contextualize that information. And if at the end of the day, your goal is to help drive growth or on-time shipping or customer success, make sure that you spend your time leveraging those indicators to do so.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dave, for the advice. My closing advice, please.
Well, I would say, as whatever you track, make sure you understand where the data comes from, how it is collected, and what influences that data, all the impacts to that indicator. Understand it. Don't just react and think this is what it is. Understand where your data comes in and an appropriate response.
Okay, amazing, Mike. Thank you so much. Paul, closing advice, please.
So quick, make sure that the people who are doing the work can make a clear connection to the indicators that you're using that affect their area. If they don't see a connection to those indicators, if you're keep it simple, if the people who are doing the work don't see the connection between their work and what you said you want to track and what you said is important, they don't have the ability to contribute to that. If they see that connection, they will astound you with the things that they will come up with to actually make that, get that indicator, get that measurement where you want it to be.
Amazing, guys. Thank you so much. And that's it for today. If you joined for the first time, this was part of our digital transformation series for which we meet every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. So make sure you guys are going to be here next week. We are going to come back with another KPI topic. On that note, thanks everyone for tuning in tonight.
Thanks, guys. See you
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Oliver.
Have a good evening.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge in journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Chris Gherardini, head over to turnkeytech.com. It's turnkeytech.com. If you want to learn more about Paul Brigel, head over to forabetterbusiness.com. It's forabetterbusiness.com. If you want to learn more about Andy Pratico, head over to essoft.com. It's essoft.com. If you want to learn more about Mike Slagenhofer, head over to equity.com. It's acuity.com. If you want to learn more about Dave Griffith, head over to dave-griffith.com. It's dave-griffith.com. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.